I'm Bambi Francisco. There's a new crop of video networks emerging online. Some appear to be doing better than others. Heavy.com, a channel for men between 18 and 34 years old, expects to rake in $15 million in advertising sales this year. Well, joining me to talk about this new internet network is co-CEO Simon Assad. Simon, thanks for joining us.
Sure, Bambi. Nice to be here.
Simon, with so many new video networks out there, how do you stand out from the pack?
Well, Heavy really is the first digital entertainment brand for young men that's been built as a brand in the internet space that's not an aggregator. So we really curate a voice. We have a point of view that's around young men, around not taking yourself too seriously, around humor and comedy. And that's really the difference between Heavy as a curator and, say, YouTube as an aggregator or MySpace as an aggregator. Or even a Yahoo or an AOL or an MSN.
Now, your channel is actually very similar to Spike TV, which was launched a couple of years ago. That's a channel for men between 18 and 34, and it's had its challenges figuring out what men like to watch. So what kind of programming do you think will draw that demographic?
We find that young guys like to watch stuff that's short, sharp, and funny, or short, sharp, and action-oriented, or the obvious short, sharp, and girls. And so that combination of humor, action, and babe seems to work really well for our audience. The average guy on Heavy spends around 30 minutes per visit on the site. So you're really looking at a television type experience in terms of the length of time, but they're actually making up the program themselves by watching all the different channels on Heavy in 2 to 3 minute increments.
What are they watching?
They're watching Machinima, for example. Machinima is programming that's made out of video games. They're watching The Massive Mating Game, which is the world's largest dating show that we just launched last week, which has already had 5 million people watch it. They're watching The American Suck Countdown or Heavy News, which are our weekly countdown and news shows. They're listening to radio. They're watching extreme action sports show that we have called Blister. There's so much to watch there. The guys come back and they're constantly updated. There's a real variety.
Are they creating any of that content themselves? Give us a breakdown of what that content makeup is. Is it user-generated, licensed content, content produced by your company? How does that break down?
Sure, Bambi, that's a great question. About 50% of the content on Heavy we produce and oversee internally at Heavy.com. Of the other 50%, about 15% is licensed from professional or semi-professional creators, and then the other 35% is actually submitted by users. The difference being that we actually filter, package, and editorialize that user-generated content. So for example, we have a channel called Crashes and Burns, which is user-generated programming submitted by users, that is, them kind of crashing and doing silly stunts.
Now, you are an advertising-based model. You expect to generate about $15 million in advertising sales this year. Is that correct? Is advertising your only model?
Well, actually, out of that $15 million, we're looking about 90% that's actually coming strictly from ads on Heavy.com. And then we actually have taken the content that we're creating and used that to generate networks off Heavy through VOD, through video on demand, that is, through mobile, and then through international distribution relationships, where we're either getting a share of the advertising revenue or a license fee as an advance against the advertising revenue.
So you'll license some of your content that's created there.
That's right.
Okay. Now, I noticed that you had a mashup of, is it Yoda and Abbott and Costello's Who's on First?
Yeah,
very funny, by the way. But
is.
Did you license that content, and are you allowed to just allow your audience to mash up content?
Well, that was actually user submitted, and a lot of the content that's user submitted falls into an area under fair use. For example, if you look at Heavy News, you'll see segments of Heavy News that are parodies, for example, of CNN, where we've actually used CNN content under the fair use doctrine and parodied it. So there's a lot of grey area in the copyright space right now.
If you're asked to take that down, you may have to take that down, though, correct?
Sure. If obviously, if a copyright owner comes to us and says, you know what, we don't agree with your version of the fair use doctrine,
right,
and we believe you should take it down, as copyright owners, we respect that.
Okay.
And we take it down.
I've got a couple more questions. How much are advertisers paying to be on your site? What are the CPMs going for?
So CPM average across the board is around $15 to $20. And with the range between $10 and $50 depending on the kind of unit they buy.
Okay, and last question, now that Grouper was snapped up by Sony and Atom Films, snapped up by Viacom, do you think you need to be part of a larger media company?
I think that Heavy has an enormous amount of value as an independent and standalone business. We certainly have sufficient resources to compete on our own, witness our meteoric rise over the last 3 years. But certainly, you know, there are advantages, I imagine, which is why those companies sold, to being a part of a larger conglomerate. Only time will tell. Okay,
I'm sorry, last question. Are you looking for funding?
Right now, we're actually fully funded. Our partner Polaris Ventures invested $10 million in Heavy in December of last year, and we'll be cash flow positive this year. So the only reason we would take funding is if there was some advantage to growing quicker.
Okay, wish you the best of luck.
Thanks very much, Bambi.
Thanks, Simon.
Right,
I've been speaking with Simon Assad. He's a co-CEO of Heavy.com. I'm Bambi Francisco.